Okay, so you've probably noticed that I've made a whole bunch of videos on the topic of moving. And you might watch those and ask, what is this guy up to? Why is he so obsessed about this? Well, I'll tell you what I'm up to. Okay, I'll put all the cards on the table. But first, let me tell you what I'm not up to. So you might expect that a guy making all these videos about moving and, oh, by the way, it just so happens that I already live at the place that I think is the best to live, or at least in the general region. It's not a huge region, but I guess geographically it's pretty large. No, I am not trying to persuade you to come here. This isn't some cult where I'm going to pull back the curtain and say, guess what? You should all move in on my front lawn. First off, I don't have a very big front lawn. Look, here's the truth. For most of you, this idea of living in closer proximity to other people who aren't your immediate family is sort of a new, exciting, theoretical thing. For me, it's not. My entire adult life, I have been very serious about using whatever I have to the greatest purpose of the Lord. I've consecrated whatever it is that I have, including my living situation, to helping other people. When I was a younger single guy, I was splitting a basement with a roommate of mine in a townhouse, and I remember fighting the battle with all my roommates in that place, all these single guys, to try to convince them to let us have this ex-convict move in with us, who I had met through church, and he didn't have any place to go. And so I've been at it for a very long time. And because I know this, I've had family members live with me, like not my own wife and kids. I've had friends live with me. I've had random strangers live with me. And I've done this as a single man, as a married man with kids. It is not a glamorous thing. It's not fun. It's not exciting. It's very painful. It's enormously risky. There's a lot that has to be learned about it in order to do it wisely. And it doesn't matter if you're the giver or the receiver. It's extremely challenging. And I promise you that if you were to show up on my front lawn, first off, we'd really have to have a chat, and it might involve the police. So don't do that. There are a lot of crazy people out there. But even if it were planned and organized, I promise you that you would not like that nearly as much as you might imagine. Now, most of you have hopefully watched enough of these videos that you don't need me to tell you that. It's the last thing you'd want is to be in closer proximity to a guy like me. But most of you probably still need to be told this. What will happen over time is that many of you will have opportunities to provide places to live for other people who are in need or for whom that would be mutually beneficial. And some of you will be taking advantage of those opportunities as they're offered to you. But this is not what I'm after with all of these videos about moving. It's actually much more relevant and practical than all of this. What I'm trying to help you do is to open your eyes to opportunities to change your life for the better in ways that probably aren't on your mind. In other words, you're looking at the menu of life and I'm telling you, hey, that menu has a back, flip it over too. There's many more options on that menu than you know about. And actually the thing you're not aware of might be 10 or 100 times better than the options you're aware of. That's what I'm about with this. Moving matters to your personal progression in non-obvious ways. And those ways have very little to do with me. But they might have everything to do with the best kind of person that you could become. So here's a question for you to help prove this. We are trying to orient our lives more closely to God? Hopefully it's we. It's certainly something I'm always trying to do. Hopefully you're part of that club. So, can you orient your life more closely to God when huge chunks of your life are not part of that process, are off limits to it? Where you live is enormously important. It's an enormous chunk of your life. Do you believe it? Let me make some points here to help convince you. One, your emotional and physical health are connected to where you live. Do you think that there's a difference? I remember once being in New York for a business trip, the city, New York City, and I walked into the hotel room, and from the center of the hotel room, I could reach every wall without moving my feet. That's how small the room was. It was ridiculous. And they tried to still make it look like a fully furnished hotel room, and they had like miniature versions of every piece of furniture you'd find in a hotel room, and there was no space between them. It was like some sick joke. Your emotional health is absolutely a factor of where and how you live. But your physical health is too. You know, a lot of people that watch this channel, they live in northern Utah along the I-15 corridor. The pollution in that area is so terrible that it has a higher rate of asthma than almost any other part of the country. Just by living there, you're putting your children in harm's way and yourself. And people don't like thinking about that because it makes them feel super uncomfortable. But if you really want to get to the point where you're living a rational life, you have to think about the pros and cons of all situations that are available to you. And you have to look at the bad things. And if it's still the best situation, it's fine, but you don't hide from the costs. You have to admit them. Now, that's just one example. But believe me that your physical health, now what about what you eat? So you may not know this. When I pull an apple out of my orchard, depending on what vitamin or mineral we're looking at, that apple might be 35 times better than a store apple. Because the store apples come from ground that's been farmed for over 100 years. And the soil's depleted. And so those are not nutrient-dense foods. If you grow your own food, odds are that what you're eating is way healthier than anything you can buy at the grocery store. This absolutely has an effect on your health and on your life. There are significant financial effects. And there's a whole lot of things that come downstream from having extra money. Some of them you can predict, and some of them are based on things that haven't happened yet, whether that's in your individual life or society as a whole. The point is, the normal way is not good enough. You have to have surplus. Surprises require surplus. It could be the case that there are living situations in a different place that are massively more affordable than what you're paying right now. And again, just like all the other options here, it tends to be something that normal people don't think about. They don't look at the back of the menu. If I told you, and obviously whether this is true or not depends on a lot of particulars, it'd be an individual thing, but suppose I told you, look, whatever you're spending a month for your living situation right now, there's something out there that's 25% of that. And you probably would get a better situation out of it. It's not just the same thing for less. That's crazy. That's a crazy amount of improvement. And when you're talking after-tax money, it can make this is life-changing money here, right? It's a lot, potentially. What about the people around you? You know, this is something that you probably wouldn't believe me if I told you. If you move to a different place with people that are less likely to be knuckleheads, you can actually feel the difference. You can actually feel the difference. And if this were just my personal experience, maybe I'd be less inclined to share it. I've heard so many people say this. But it's not just about how you feel from day to day, and that absolutely has an effect on your emotional and physical health. But what about the kinds of kids that play with your kids? What about the physical safety of your children? In the world today, can you even imagine living in a place where your kids can go outside and play and you have absolutely no worry about it? Can you imagine living in a place where you're more scared of wildlife hurting your kids than some random stranger? It's possible. So my question for you is, how confident are you that you've accurately explored the available options for where to live? And that where you're living right now is your conscientiously chosen ideal place, ideal in terms of long-term net benefit, out of all the options you have. Almost no one can say that that's the case. Now, I'm not saying ideal in a perfect world, if money were no issue, if logistics were no issue, if mother-in-laws were no issue. I'm saying subject to all the limitations you're under. Can you confidently assert that you're living in the best place you know of that's available to you? If your answer is no, you cannot say that you have oriented your life to what is best. And you can't say that you've repented of your sins because you're knowingly doing less than what's best. Or at least you're not exploring what could be best, and you have the ability to do so. If you don't know what's out there, you haven't even bothered to look, then how can you be confident that you're doing what's best? You can't. And that in and of itself has an effect on your well-being in ways that you're probably not aware of. But it's acting like this ulcer, sucking your vitality, your spiritual vitality, out of your life. You have to look at all these things in life in a measured way, not in some crazy, I'm going to pause my life and lock myself in a room until I can emerge confident that I'm doing what's best in every single way. Although there are worse things you could do. But in a measured way, taking a chunk out of this as you can take time once a week and sit down and sort through it or whatever your timeline is, and get yourself oriented to the best that you know. That is God's will for you. And if you're not aware of it, you haven't done the due diligence to look into it, you've got some problems in your life. And you're putting yourself in a place where you're absolutely going to get hit with things that are not good and that are completely optional. And when they happen, you'll be able to do nothing except say, I chose this. And that's not a place that you want to be. Speaking of places. So why should you move? Well, maybe you shouldn't, right? And that's the funny thing about being open-minded about things. You don't know what the answer is ahead of time. And the funny thing is you could go through this process of tearing apart the puzzle of your life and rebuilding it and having the same exact picture you were looking at before. But there will be this key difference, which is that you will have this confidence and clarity that you never had before. Because now you've done the due diligence to make sure that where you're at and what you're doing is the best that you know. It's not just the random thing where you put your canoe in the river and you ended up where everybody else did. You've got a compass and a map and a paddle, and you're going to where you're intentionally going. And it makes a world of difference in life. So when it comes to moving, it's just another example of this mentality that we have to escape, which is option A is good and option B is bad. Life is not like that. It's circumstantial. You have to look at the situation. You have to look at the people involved. You have to look at the options that are available. In your case, moving might be the exact thing. Or it might be exactly what you shouldn't do. And you'll never know till you look into it. If you don't have better reasons to move than you do to stay, you shouldn't move. God will not bless you for doing stupid things. And when it comes to things like this, there are two groups of people who get excited about it. One is the group that gets excited because it's some new shiny thing that they think will continue to distract them from the real thing that they need to be worrying about in life, which might be like issues with their spouse, or the fact that they kind of hate their kids secretly, or the fact that they're addicted to porn, or that they are overweight and they really don't want to be, or whatever. Whatever the thing is, don't get distracted by shiny things of A is good, B is bad, and think that if you flood your life with the A is good stuff, it will shield you from all the stuff that you don't want to change that you know you need to. The other group that gets really excited about this is the group that closes their eyes as tightly as they can and completely ignores anyone who's saying things that they don't want to hear. God will not bless you for doing stupid things. And if someone comes along and says, hey, have you ever thought about moving? And it just so happens that it's a better option to you than anything else that's available, and you just ignore it, then you're lining yourself up for a lot of unnecessary pain in life. And the same goes for the kinds of people that get excited about it as yet another distraction from the thing that they really need to focus on. So I'll give you an example of this. And this is the example of the kinds of people that get excited because it's yet another thing to distract them. The A is good people. So suppose that you live in St. George and you are really excited about this idea of moving, but you can't really look at the options because your wife is a stick in the mud. And you say, but I'm really excited about moving, so I'm going to buy this place that's an hour away in the middle of the desert, and it costs a fortune, and I'll never be able to grow anything on it, and I have to dump all my equity in my current house and all my savings, and I'll still have to get a mortgage on top of that. But hey, I can say that I'm in the A is good column because I'm going to move. It's clearly not what's best for you. And don't let it distract you from the real thing that you need to be worried about, which is fixing the issues with your wife. All right. So, understand that it's not just a binary thing. There are a million different options of where to move, when to move, how to move, why to move. And they're very, very specific to you. So for example, and so you can play this to your advantage by knowing that there are lots and lots of options, and maybe there's one of them on this big old list that's really good for you. So for example, if you live in your typical suburban postage stamp yard, super strict HOA, you got to get somebody's permission before you wipe your butt kind of place, there are tons of places that you could move that would be functionally very similar to your present situation. You really wouldn't have to change jobs. Maybe it's a different location for your same company. Maybe you're doing the same exact thing in another town that's an awful lot like where you live right now. You're just not in a stupid HOA. And you're not dumping $400 a month into this Karen-led paramilitary Nazi group, right? And you can get to a place where you can have a couple of chickens, maybe a raised bed or two, and plant 3 fruit trees. And your life will be a million times better. Plus you get to pocket all that money that you're paying to the stupid HOA to make your life miserable. That's wonderful. And all it takes is a move, right? You might even stay in the same city. There's probably a million houses that are like that aren't in some weird HOA. And you can finally have a couple of chickens and whatever. That's a tiny, tiny jump from where you are, and it would be a million times better. Now from there, there's an enormous jump to getting to the point where you grow pretty much everything that you eat, and you live in the middle of nowhere. That's a huge jump. And frankly, most people don't want to do that, and they wouldn't be happy in that. And that's fine. We all get to choose what we want in life. So this isn't about me or anyone else dictating to you what you should or shouldn't do in life. It's about me or anyone else pointing out the fact that what you do in life should be intentional. And however you define best, that's on you. But you should absolutely be actually doing that in your life, whatever it is. You and I very likely define that word differently. What's best? But I actually live according to my understanding of it in everything I do all the time. And you and everyone else should be able to say the same. But if you can't, there are changes that you need to make in your life. And one of them might be moving. All right. So let's talk about some of the general benefits. A short list would include faith, and I'll talk more about that. It would include money. It would include acreage. And it includes long-term risk aversion. Now, you could say a lot about all these. I'm just going to say a little. So, faith, we'll talk about more in a second here. With money, for most people, they're dramatically lower cost regions that they could be living in. Now, that's highly constrained by work options, and it's very individual, but you should definitely do the work necessary to look into whether there are dramatically lower cost of living situations that you could move into. Now, obviously, one slider on that is adjustments to your lifestyle, and that may or may not be part of the equation. In some cases, you could have a higher quality of life at a lower cost. But in other cases, there might be situations where there's something that costs you something in your life and it's not really worth all that much to you. Like maybe you live on a golf course and you just don't care. You're paying a premium for that, but maybe you just don't care. And so on. Now, one of the financial benefits of moving is that they're rare, but there are still lower cost places that are very likely to appreciate significantly as inflation continues to bleed out. It's like water flowing downhill. The places that are low cost are not going to be low cost forever. People will seek those out, but for now, there's still a gradient of faith. There are people who will do the work to seek these places out, but most people just kind of live in the same place. And if they move, they just kind of move to where everyone else is moving. And so it's still on the leading side of that. In certain places, if you seek them out, you can actually stand to make quite a bit of money because you're still early to the game. But the number of places for which that is true, it gets rarer every day. Now, when we talk about acreage, what I mean is rural land. And I think the biggest thing here, there are a lot of points, but the biggest point is that the more serious you are about growing more of the food that you eat, most people have to move pretty far away to get to a place where that's feasible. All right, now let's zoom in a bit, starting on faith, and we'll go through each one of these, and then we'll be done here. Faith increases and decreases all at once. So you shouldn't see this as chopping up your life into innumerable tiny little boxes, and then you exercise faith in each of these boxes independent of everything else. It's a character quality. It's every time you exercise faith, you become more of a faithful person. And every time you go the other way, you become less of a faithful person. And this is why it's so important to think about moving. Until you've done the due diligence to assure yourself that you're in the best situation, this might be one of the biggest changes that you could make in your life that would have one of the biggest positive improvements. To ignore something better is unbelief. And that's not good. To make decisions based on expected net benefit is faith. You have to know what options exist. You have to evaluate the cost and benefit of each of those options. You have to decide what's best based on rational reasons, not based on what everyone else is doing or how you feel about it, but actual rational reasons. And then you need to develop and execute a long-term plan. This is what it takes to have faith. This is what it means to have faith. If you're just sort of washed up on the shore of life in whatever place, and you're not even really thinking about what your options are, and you're just sort of going through the motions, you are not a faithful person. You're a faithless person. And what that means is there are tons of blessings that God has for you that you're putting on the shelf and you don't even know about them. And in place of that, you're going to get bombarded with situations that are unpleasant and that are completely avoidable because you've put yourself in a place where God can't help you all that much because you're not paying attention. You're not using the abilities that He's given you to pay attention to life and improve and choose what you want. Now, what are some ways in which moving can save you some money? If you watch this channel, you know that I believe that the financial noose is tightening, that it's getting harder and harder to be successful. And that's just going to continue. So there are things that you can do to get out in front of this that might have a dramatic impact on your financial profile over the course of your life. Things like property tax are just going to keep going up. Homeowners insurance, interest rates are high. They might never go down, but they might go down. Utilities are definitely going to keep going up. Food costs are definitely going to keep going up. So if you're a reasonable person, you could look at this and say, these things are really expensive and they're getting worse. Are there options open to me where I can mitigate these trends? Are there places with radically lower property tax? Yes, there are. Are there places where the property tax is likely to grow slower than where I live? Yes, there are. Are there places I could move and by using the equity I already have or just by being thrifty, I stand a chance to pay off my house so I can get rid of homeowners insurance and be free of it? Yes, there are. Are there places where doing an equity swap or whatever other tricks can get me out of paying interest because I can own my home? Yes, there are. Are there places that have dramatically lower utility cost because, for example, maybe it's not so cold in the winter or I can burn wood for heat instead of paying somebody? Yep. Are there places where I can grow more of my own food so that I can reduce my dependence on increasing food costs? Yes. Now, the funny thing about this, when we talk about a noose tightening, the problem is that these things getting more expensive, all of them reduce your ability to sell the house you live in right now. If you're in a situation where you own a home, as these things continue to go up, the set of people that can afford to buy you out shrinks. And so the longer you wait, the more of a problem this could become. Right now, some of you have enough equity that you could fully pay off land and put a nice house on it in certain places in this country. For example, West Virginia. Some of you are in this situation where you could go from where you are to having a fully paid off house and land in a very pretty place. And your financial profile for life would radically improve. But those opportunities will not last. They're already rare. As soon as more people look into it, it will be gone. And I gave you a similar warning before COVID, and it applied to a lot of other areas. And now there are just a few places where this is still true, but there are still places where this is true. But they won't last forever. It's disappearing very quickly. What about acreage? What about being in a rural place? I have an entire separate presentation on this that I'm putting together. But in a nutshell, living in a rural lifestyle best trains a family in the best way. And it's so much of a bigger deal than people realize. It is an enormous deal. Just some of the benefits are that it encourages responsibility, a more accurate understanding of value. It teaches people how to work hard. It promotes health, and it reduces food costs. These are really big benefits when it comes to life. It turns out that if we had half a brain, we would probably pay to send our kids to grow up on farms. But instead, we don't even take advantage of the opportunity to live on farms, because many of you actually have this available as an option. Not all of you, but a lot of you. You just kind of look at it and it's passing by, that one day your kids are grown up and they're knuckleheads, and it's like, a lot of this could have been avoided. But there will be a whole separate presentation on that. Now, finally, when we talk about long-term risk aversion, there's a whole lot of bad things that could happen. Which of these are going to happen, when, exactly what's it going to be like, it's not super duper important at the moment. The point is, when you start thinking about things like a shortage of food or economic collapse, like the failure of the dollar or something, or disease, or some kind of military invasion, or the grid going down, or people just becoming more and more crazy, civil violence, or unrest of some sort. The more of these things you look at, the more a rural area starts looking pretty good. So, this is in a nutshell, at a high level, why I keep talking about moving. And there's not an unlimited amount of information to share about this, but this is what I'm trying to help people understand. It happens to be an enormous set of things that could change and provide enormous benefit. And people really aren't thinking about it. And so I'm trying to bang this drum as hard as I can. Hopefully it helps. If you find these things useful, I encourage you to consider donating to the ministry. You can do that at upwardthought.org/donate. I spend all of my time making these videos and writing the books that I do. I give it away all for free. And it's only your donations that make it possible. So thank you for those few who help. And I strongly encourage those who haven't to consider making a donation if it won't displace anything more important in your life, and to make that donation recurring if at all possible.